Derren Brown, thank you so much for speaking to us on Kingdom FM.
This is very exciting. Thank you very, very much for having me. I'm in Dublin at the moment, which is amazing. It's a real treat. I love touring very much, and it's very nice to be sat here talking to you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, it's a real pleasure. You mentioned you're in Dublin just now. You're then going on to Belfast, aren't you? And then you come to us.
That's right. Yeah, I'm doing Belfast and then Derry, and then I then heading over to Edinburgh. So it's an 8-month tour. It's a long tour, and this is the biggest stint away from home within it. And yeah, Edinburgh is a big highlight of that. There's a few cities, of which Dublin is one as well, which are just huge delights on tour and always have amazing crowds. So yeah, I can't wait to come see you.
Yeah, brilliant. So you're in the Playhouse in Edinburgh on the 3rd of May through to the 7th.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're up to Aberdeen after
and
that.
And then up to Aberdeen, yeah. Another beautiful city. Yeah, it's just so exciting. And then I get a week off, which I will probably need.
I think at this point, Derren, it's fair for me to point out that Vanessa is a serial Derren Brown autograph collector.
Really?
And you've got how many Derren Brown autographs now?
Oh, maybe 2 or 3. Yes,
right.
I've met you a couple of times, Derren.
You have a collection of my autographs?
No, look, Dave's made that sound creepier than it is.
Creepy, yeah.
Yeah, no.
But also, sorry, why would? But I mean, as in, like, I've signed things for. Are they? I mean, they're not on your body. They're
not. No. So I followed you since not followed you since the beginning. But yeah, I've been thanks, Dave. Been a fan since the beginning, since the very first show. Wow. At the Adam Smith in Kirkcaldy. Yeah. Do you remember that?
Kirkcaldy, yeah, I do. Many years ago. I remember that theatre really, really well. Gosh, and you came to that. It was a one-nighter, I think, wasn't it?
It was a one-night show. I think you had started your Channel 4 show at the time.
It's just stuck in my mind as a real memory from that early tour. Probably one of the very few that I can remember, because that was like 20-something years ago.
Yeah, that was your beard and cloak phase, wasn't it?
You must have been a tiny child. You look so young.
Oh, look, saying all the right things.
Derren, talking about 20 odd years ago, I rewatched some of your kind of classic episodes, if you like, and the one that that everyone must go back to is the Russian Roulette episode when you did that. I can't believe that's 19 years ago now, because I remember watching that live at the time. Yeah,
it is sort of slight. Like, I'm 50 now, and it is odd. Like, I remember when I started meeting people who said, I grew up watching. I used to watch you as a kid. It was a really odd thing to hear that for the first time. It was the first thing I did that sort of was attracted a lot of attention. Up until then, I'd done a few shows that were Mind Control, they were called, on Channel 4, and they were sort of quieter things. And then that was that was the first big sort of stunt show, I suppose, for want of a better word. And then shortly after that, I think I did my first stage show, and now here we are.
You did say when you did Russian Roulette at the time that you would not pull the trigger unless you were 100% confident. And yet at the end of the episode, you could see in your face, it looked like genuine relief. I mean, were you fully 100% confident when you did that?
My memory of it, I mean, first of all, I don't look it, but I'm nervous. I remember my leg was shaking violently under the table, plus all the stuff you don't see, which nowadays would have shown, but there's like a lineup of ambulances and things outside. There was so much happening around just, me sat at that table. And, never done anything big like that, let alone anything live before. So it was my main memory, apart from all those things, from a kind of an emotional point of view, was I had like a whole, almost like a set of algorithms I was going through. I'd rehearsed it as much as I could. And I kind of had like a sort of, well, if this happens, I'll do this. And if this happens, I do this. And it would all work really well as long as I didn't think about the fact that it's a bullet. And I didn't get kind of emotionally sort of kind of involved in it. It was about just keeping just a clear head, like it was just a 1 in 6 game. So that's my main memory. So it's weird as an emotional thing to think back to, because it wasn't, from that point of view, it wasn't an emotional experience. I wasn't thinking, oh God, because then it wouldn't have worked. But at the same time, I do remember the leg going, and the adrenaline was still kind of finding its way out. Yeah, it was a long time ago. There was an aspect to it which is I've sort of forgotten about since, but we did that around the time that Big Brother and things were all kind of exploding onto the scene. So one part of it was a kind of a bit of a comment on, what will people actually watch on TV? Because it was around the time that we were just tuning in and watching people just living in a room together and arguing and, you know, things that seemed really strange at the time. So that was part of it. That was part of the reason for doing it.
And do you feel that was the episode, or that was the thing that sort of changed your life and made you get more internationally known?
Hard to say. I think there's been a few things. I mean, that was one of them. The lottery thing I did many years later as well. I think that made a difference. Doing stage shows made a difference. More recently, probably doing Broadway. So I think you have these little things in your career that you're just aware, like, oh, I've kind of made a bit of a step forward. But for me, I've never had any drive to do that, or to kind of, I've never had any ambition at all. That's never been anything that's sort of appealed. So most of these ideas for things that have drawn more attention have either come from the sort of producers that I work with, or it's just been part of the sort of marketing effort of the channel. Like, so the lottery prediction thing we did was only going to be just like one little trick within a TV show, but Channel 4 were very keen on really pushing that as a marketed thing. So it ended up being like a big publicity stunt, as it wasn't designed as one. So sometimes these things do just kind of happen without any particular sort of planning. But I've tried to avoid, chasing those things for their own sake. I've tried just to do things that feel worthwhile, have like a dramatic hook, something that makes you go, I want to watch that, but then actually have a more serious kind of underpinning and a good reason for doing them, which is important as well. If you're putting somebody through, you know, a nightmarish journey, then you've got to have, I think, a good reason for doing it.
You mentioned there about you have to be thinking it through thoroughly, particularly if you're going to put a participant through something intense. The one that sticks out to me is, again, from, I think, Mind Control some time back, and it was the zombie apocalypse episode where you took a person, I think it was out at the pub, and you put them into the computer game. So you took them into a hospital, they were under hypnosis, and then they came to and they believed they were in the game. And I have often wondered with that episode, how does that person deal with that on the other side, to suddenly be in a zombie game and then...
Yeah, and that ended up being that, because yes, right, there was a thing with a guy playing a computer game and then he ends up sort of waking up in it. And then later there was the apocalypse show that I did, which sort of took the same idea and made it much bigger, when a guy, so this is a big 2-episode thing, where we convince him the world is ending in the first episode. And then in the second episode, he does wake up in a hospital, and then he's trying to find his family, and there's zombies, and it's like a huge, like, dark adventure thing that he goes through. And so particularly, probably more so with that one, which is kind of my favorite, I think, of the shows as well. It does feel like someone's going through something that's very dark and reckless, but we try and make the shows feel like that. The reality is that person, although their reality has to be perfect and untouched, they can't have any sense that there's anything going on other than what we understand they're going through. But the reality is around them, although they're unaware of it, there's a whole medical infrastructure and psychologists that are completely independent of us, that we can all step in at any point. There are triggers and things that I've laid in along his way that he doesn't really know of consciously, but that I can use to bring him out of a situation. And also, if I just walked into it at any point and went, look, you're fine, you know, obviously he just experienced relief, the project would be over. But in terms of their well-being, it's okay. Plus, we also they have to be vetted at the start. So, for example, you know, if somebody has been through a traumatic experience, seen somebody die in a car crash, we can't do anything that's going to involve a car crash with them, you know. So they go through this independent psychological vetting, which of course they think that everyone's going through, but probably at that point it's only our top few favorites, you know, as part of this audition process. So it's a very elaborate thing to make sure that this person, what they're going through, is absolutely perfect. The experience is seamless for them, but that they are okay, that they're sort of held in a bubble, even though they don't know it. They have no idea. And that will include all the other actors that are involved and trained. They have specific instructions so they can keep this person where we want them as well, in terms of their own well-being, and not just make life hellish for them, which is might be what it appears like, you know, when you kind of watch the final product. So yeah, it's a balancing act. And I think that the thing that has thrown me the most over the years of doing it is how sort of predictably the people do follow the tracks that we've laid down for them. It's always a surprise to the production teams, because they tend to change from show to show, so they're always nervous that, you know, it isn't going to work, and I'm sort of in the middle going, oh no, it'll be fine. But it is odd, because it's a strange sort of compliance. It's, I'm putting these things in place and they're just following these tracks. Obviously, I've got the luxury of picking the person I think it's going to work well with. I mean, if you just did it with, 1,000 random people, you'll get a much clearer sense of how well would this stuff work. It's a fascinating and very emotional process for us all as well. Again, that's another aspect of it. So watching that apocalypse show play out, we're all in the gallery, in this truck hidden in the bushes, literally watching it play out on screen, seeing this guy wake up and put all these pieces together and realize essentially the world has ended and he doesn't know where his family is. And for us, that's something, we've written and planned, and now we put somebody in, and they're experiencing it as real, and you can see it on their face, and we're all kind of like just then catching up with the reality of it emotionally, and half of us are in tears, and it's a really cathartic, extraordinary thing to go through.
Wow, obviously a massive team behind the scenes. Thank you for explaining that. That's amazing.
Just to give you an idea of that, it is a big team. They were very overstretched for that show, and there's one tiny moment in Apocalypse where we have to make Stephen, who's the guy, his TV cut out while he's watching it with his family, right? And obviously his family are all in on it. And just to make his TV cut out, that involves a runner, so a guy from our team who's in the shed in the garden, Stephen's garden, and then we have to have two guys there. So there's two runners, just making sure that everything's okay. So they're just going to pull a cable that cuts his TV out, but they then can't leave the shed because if they cross the garden, they might be seen by Stephen because the room the TV's in and Stephen's bedroom looks out over the garden. So they have to spend the night in Stephen's shed in his garden. And this is after 3 months of there's no time off for anybody. A really, stressful, massive, ambitious project. And then, a night in the shed for this moment that no one remembers. It's a tiny, nothing moment. So yeah, they are a huge amount of effort and a massive, massive team project.
I'll be watching it differently now then, that's for sure. Ooh. You mentioned earlier on you love touring, and I think you've mentioned that before. Do you prefer touring and being on stage to the specials on television, or are they both something special in their own way?
No, I do. The TV shows are wonderful like that, as the experience of watching them play out, like as it's happening. I do enjoy that, but there's something about the process of making TV which just is, I don't know, it's just nothing like the same league of the adrenaline and fun of putting a show together and then going out and doing it. And it's I get to be this really well-rehearsed, charismatic version of myself every night, which is nice. And then I love the actual being on the road and touring and being in amazing cities and reading and writing during the day. It's a very lovely sort of rhythm for me. But yeah, there's nothing quite like it. And also, I think given what I do, one of the reasons why the TV shows have gone down that other route is because when I'm doing the stuff that I'm kind of rooted in, which is that sort of mind-reading, magic-y thing, whatever you want to call it, it's just better as it's a live thing. You need to see the edges of it. You need to know that you've sat there throughout the whole thing and there's no editing that's happened. You could have been involved yourself. And if you're not involved, the person next to you maybe has, or certainly someone two down from you, if not you. It's quite an emotional show. And it's my starting point with the stage show is always the experience of the audience. They're trapped in a room with me for a couple of hours. What can we do? And it's very much about the audience. It's not about me looking clever, which is, a thing with magic of, if I can call it magic, but that world, which is frustrating because that tends to be the bottom line, isn't it? Look how clever I am. So I really try and make it about the audience. So to me, it's a very communal sort of experience, and all of that is something you can't really get with TV, and part of the real joy of doing a show like this.
I think that's also why I, and obviously your fan base, love what you do, because that kind of magic show, your show is very much involving people. Yeah. There's a thread, there's a story through it, and it's something that every time I've left one of your shows, you're sort of changed by.
Oh, that's lovely. That's nice to hear. I try to make the shows about, as I said, something other than just how I'm doing it. But a problem with magic of any sort, it's not a magic show, but it's certainly got one foot in that, hasn't it? So part of the problem with it always is that the really interesting stuff is the stuff you can't talk about, right? The stuff that makes it work is the one bit you don't really ever get to communicate. So what tends to happen is and generally happens in the world of magic, is there's a lot of sort of posturing that covers up this sort of gap. You have to sort of pretend to be interesting because you can't talk about the really interesting stuff. So what I've tried to do is make it about other things. So I'm 50 now, and this is definitely a show of a grown-up man and not a show that I would have done when I was 30. It wouldn't have really made any sense. And I've the same with the TV shows and the books I write as well. I try and just take what I feel is worthwhile and important. It's always the inner life. The inner life is what interests me. And these are, I think, just different ways of getting at it, you know. And then it is interesting because then the nature of magic is that if a magician fools you, you're being faced with the reality that the story you're telling yourself about the world isn't actually what's real. Like there's other stuff going on that you're somehow not including in the narrative that you're forming from moment to moment about what's happening in the world. And that's a really worthwhile thing, right? That's like important stuff because, you know, we have this infinite data source that comes at us all the time and we have to edit and delete and make up a story. Otherwise we'd never move forward through it at all. But we constantly mistake our story for reality. So, you know, even in something as childish and silly as magic, there is the potential of it meaning something, of it actually being genuinely interesting and having some value. So I really enjoy, and as I get older, you know, just trying to get at what that is, which will probably be a lifelong project.
I think we don't actually want to know the mechanics behind it, and I appreciate that is probably the most interesting bit of it. But for me, it's the joy of the whole thing is lost when you find out, you know, what actually went into it. Absolutely. I like that you can walk out of the show and wonder about it, you know, for hours afterwards. That's the joy of it for me.
Totally, yeah, I agree. Sometimes the methods are interesting, but normally they're going to be a bit disappointing. But often, what makes them work from the point of view as a magician is interesting because it's always the psychology of it that makes it work, and that's the bit that sort of gets missed when you explain it. Often it just sounds like, oh, okay, it was just that. How disappointing, because the story of it was so much more exciting. But again, the show's not about that, and I think if it was just about that, it would only be, you know, so interesting so far.
It's that psychology, that mind, the whole thing that's about it. It's just absolutely fascinating. And I was looking at a few of the tweets people were saying about Showman, your new show. One, I used to work in a big theatre in town, and when we had Derren Brown in, all the ushers had to put earplugs in their show in case we got hypnotised.
Right, I had no idea that was going on.
And also, Derren, I can't sleep thinking about the show. What on earth happened? Mind-blowing, confusing. Thanks for another great night. Hurry back to Dublin. And there was another person that said, your shows are always amazing, but this is up another level. You've already won and been nominated for Olivia Awards for your shows before you've been in Broadway. And this sounds like this show, The Showman, which has obviously had a lot of work go into it, pre-pandemic as well, is up another level. Is that how you feel from your side?
Well, the response to the show has been amazing, which is lovely. It's a very personal show too, so it's very nice to have it received like that. I think the big difference is we had a couple of years of lockdown to keep working on it, and that's never happened before. Normally, we do what we can in a rehearsal room, but until you've actually got an audience, it's like I just don't know. I mean, some of the stuff I do only works on a percentage of the audience, so unless you've got 1,000 people, there's no way you can really even begin to see how it's going to work. So the difference is here, although we didn't have audiences, we did have a lot of time to go back and tweak it and change things, and time to step back and go, actually, that routine sounds a bit like it's not. Let's just take it out and think of something else. Whereas we'd be doing that in the first few weeks of the run. And the show in its heart is about, without giving anything away, that the things in life that feel most difficult and isolating tend to be the very things that bring us together. There's part of the human experience. When we feel we've failed and life's gone bad and we're in a difficult patch and it feels lonely and isolating, we're actually just experiencing the weight of what it is to be human. And it's the one thing we all share. And then at its heart, that was always a big part of the show. And then lockdown happened. So the show was due to start the first day of the first lockdown, and it was pulled at the last minute. And then this thing happens that is a literal play out of that idea. The very things that isolate us are the things that connect us. So although it isn't a show about COVID or lockdown, it did sort of mean that we could go back into those ideas and sort of lean into them a bit more and bring them out more. And there are other things as well that kind of happened during that period, which have now form a big part of the show, which it's just ended up being something that sits very well, I think, in this moment. So all of that, you know, was a sort of strange silver lining to an otherwise, you know, horrendous period. So yeah, perhaps I think that has actually been quite good for the show, and maybe is what's led to this kind of extraordinary response to it, which is really very, very nice. It's lovely.
The ability that you have to read people and to put shows like this together, is this something that has come through your family, or is it unique to you?
No, I started out as a hypnotist, and then I was doing close-up magic round tables in restaurants in Bristol, where I used to live, and wrote a couple of books for magicians. I just sort of, it suited me. It was I don't know, perhaps it was the control thing or whatever it was. I just loved it and fell into it. But then really it's a team effort now. So it's me, and there's two guys. There's Andrew O'Connor and Andy Nyman, who's an actor that you may know. And the two of them, the three of us work out and write the shows together, and then the two of them direct. And we've done that pretty much from day one. So we work very well together. And when you do things entirely on your own, it can just get very indulgent, because you need those other voices and you need other people to, contradict you or disagree. I think that's really the most helpful factor in all of this. We know each other, we love each other, we know the work, we have a great sort of shorthand and a great way of working together. And we're all very different, and just somehow it's been a really amazing thing. I mean, if I hadn't met those two, I don't know what I'd be doing, card tricks around tables in Bristol, which I loved and was amazing, but it would have been a very different life.
It sounds very much like it's the old analogy of, what the public sees as the duck swimming serenely along the pond, whereas underneath the legs are flapping about madly.
Yeah, there's an image of I've seen of you're looking from, it's a juggler on stage, but you're looking from backstage. So you're seeing the back of him and then the audience in the background, and he's juggling at the audience, and you're seeing behind him, there's like steps going up to where he is. There's just full of he's juggling plates, and it's just like broken plates everywhere, out of sight of the audience. And less and less of them as he finally gets to the top, where he's now juggling 3 plates for the audience. So yeah, that's the nature of life, isn't it? And I do tend to suffer from that kind of imposter syndrome thing. I always feel like I'm not quite sort of qualified to be in the room. But I think a big part of a helpful thought with that is the realization that everybody's doing that. Everyone's got what they present to each other on the outside, and then this sort of messy, clumsy, embarrassing inner life going on with all its failures and mess ups. And it's hard to remember that sometimes.
I think it's wonderful to hear you say that, actually, and for listeners, to view what you've achieved and still achieving, for you to be honest and say that you still feel like you have an imposter syndrome, which connects to so many people in our everyday life, just as you're saying, and touches on the theme of your show.
Even worse when you're a magician, because you are an imposter.
I'm faking it.
Yeah. You're never going to convince yourself you're not.
Yeah.
Well, look, and also like in the Instagram age, that we live in, which probably don't even live in the Instagram age anymore, do we? But the kind of curated theatre of triumph that we present to the world through our social media feeds only makes the matter worse. If you've only grown up in that, and you look at everyone else's life and it appears to be amazing, and you're just comparing it to your own inner experience. At least we're old enough to know that is a kind of theatre that people are putting out there, but not if that's all you know. So yeah, it's just important. It's I've always sort of had that. I've always felt like a kid in a room of grown-ups, partly because I haven't had any ambition, and I've never really cared about things like, viewing figures or advancing my career. I've only ever been drawn by what feels interesting and enjoyable to do in the moment. But now, again, at 50, I think, the sort of, midlife thing you go through, actually, I'm kind of realizing, well, maybe that's how it should be. Maybe that is actually a good feeling and not something to be embarrassed about.
Wonderful to hear. In talking about that, I was wondering how you feel on your journey. There's obviously been the journey for you and what we see as viewers on the programmes and in the shows, and the story and the narrative, therefore, through the shows as you've progressed. At the beginning, Jerry Sadowitz was a great inspiration and somebody who opened the door for you to your programme, and Channel 4 recommended you. Yes. So I was just wondering how you feel and recognise that now you are the inspiration for so many. Again, looking on Twitter earlier, I was crediting you as modernising magic, and there are so many magicians, mentalists, psychological illusionists that are now doing and performing in a style that you developed and created. And how does it feel to now be the person that's inspiring this whole next era?
Because when I first started doing it, there were, I think, 4. It felt like there were 4 other people that did mentalism. It was a very very, very niche thing, and now it's certainly a lot more popular. And I think when you there was definitely a time when it felt a bit galling, because people would, you spend months working on something and then someone steals it and all that. And it took a little bit of adjustment at first. And now I kind of, I think it's important with whatever you do, if you want to take it anywhere interesting, is you can't have, it can't feel like your whole world. If it feels like bigger than you can't really do anything with it. Whereas if you've got one foot in it and one foot in the rest of life, then at least you've kind of got the leverage to move it somewhere. So I think for that reason, I've never, or at least say never, but for the second half of my career at least, I've just tried not to take it so seriously for that reason. So so I've moved from initially finding it a bit odd and strange to sort of see myself sort of mimicked, to then just sort of finding it kind of flattering and lovely. And and of course I'm aware that when I was growing up, and there was Paul Daniels or David Blaine, of course, they each also inspired like loads of other magicians. But again, I don't really feel like I'm like those people. I don't quite put myself in one of those roles. So I struggle to see myself as someone that, as you said, it would be sort of inspiring a generation, because it just doesn't remotely feel like me. So I just try to, again, just sort of do what I do. And part of that is that a wave of similar people will follow for a bit, but, for a while. And then, Dynamo did the same, and somebody else will do the same again. And things move on, and that's none of it matters too much. I think you just want to do what you want to do. And also that thing of creatively, copying somebody is very important. We're all told, particularly in magic, not to copy each other, but actually it's a very important part of any creative process is, mimicking somebody. And you can't keep doing that. You need to find your own voice, but all those things are important. So I think it's all part of the kind of, all for the greater good as well, the kind of general creative thing. It's all good. And female magicians, that's another thing that I think is something that might have come through me, because I had a lot of female fans when I was younger. So a lot of girls started doing psychology degrees. There was a big influx of that, apparently, including you.
Well, I'm doing counselling psychotherapy because I wasn't sure. So I'm in my last few months of psychotherapy. Yeah.
Well, anyway, apparently there was a bit of an influx of that and into the world of magic. We now have our first female president of the Magic Circle. So that's like amazing. Because if you think about it, like, women in magic, I know it's a very niche area, but like, what is your role model as a woman wanting to go into magic? Like bimbo assistants or being mutilated in a box. I mean, it's horrible. So finally now that's something that, there is some actual proper...
Put the men in the box instead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We just got a few minutes left, and thank you so much. It's been an absolutely fantastic chat, but we're on the cheap Zoom here, so we've only got a few minutes before it cuts us off. At least it makes me stop talking. Just quickly, I just wanted to acknowledge your mention about, we're talking about inspiration there. I just think it's fantastic. You're now in a place where people will use Derren Brown as a verb, a noun and adjective. And that you are now, that your name is now the catch-all for if anything goes a bit awry, or, somebody's played a trick on someone, COVID, Brexit, whatever, somebody's Derren Browned you. Who are you, Derren Brown? I mean, you're almost an Oxford dictionary. I mean, it's amazing.
It's very odd when you get you get blamed for things like COVID and Brexit, and like anything like that breaks. I look at my social media feed and it's just full of people going, "Come on, is this you?" When lockdown happened, the guy Stephen that went through Apocalypse texted me and said, I feel very well equipped for this. Thank you. So yeah, it is odd. My mum always just lets me know if I get mentioned on something, if my name comes up as the answer in a quiz, or as you say, gets used like that. It's she always lets me know. So yeah, very odd, strange. I try not.
Very quickly, have you ever? I know these shows are planned out meticulously, obviously, but have you ever found yourself in a situation where you've been thrown a curveball during a live show and you thought, wasn't expecting that to happen, and how did you deal with it?
Every night. That's part of the joy of it. I mean, you try and. It's happened before, occasionally right at the very final moment, the button of the finale and then that's like a bad moment for it to happen. But it's the nature of the show for me, and the point of it and the joy of it is just to be very present and in this sort of shared thing that we're all going through. And I know that might all sound a bit sappy, but that it's just the way that I kind of approach it. So I try and be very open to those kind of things. And because, of course, if you're watching a show that feels like this guy just does exactly the same every night, it's not that interesting. So I really try and make sure they do feel and are kind of a bit on the edge of their, on the, whatever the expression would be, on its toes, and could go this way and could go that way. So I love it. You try to make sure it doesn't happen at the moments that are going to upset the structure of the show and just leave people feeling a bit confused. And if that does happen, it does. And so you have a martini and get on with the show the next.
Derren Brown, thank you so much for chatting to us. Thank you so much for giving us your time. I know you're going to be performing and on stage later on tonight, so thank you so much. You're going to be in Edinburgh at the Playhouse on the 3rd of May, and then till the 7th, and then onwards to Aberdeen from the 10th. I bought my tickets ages ago. I'll be there on the Wednesday, and then I'm going to bring my niece and nephew along another night as well. So I'm introducing loads of people.
Come and say hello afterwards. It'd be nice.
I'd love to.
I'd love to. Well, thank you so very much. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much. Have an amazing show tonight.
Love to get on it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.